Hey friends, I want to welcome you to another episode of Before Conference Conversations. This is a podcast where we are preparing for the upcoming United Methodist General Conference happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, April 23rd through May 3rd of 2024. And our preparation is focused on our legislative committees that are before the General Conference. And so today we are excited to be joined by the Reverend Beth Gibbons, who is our one of our Virginia representatives, I should say, on the Judicial Administration Legislative Committee. We're going to ask Hunter to edit in a Law and Order clip right here.
Okay, nice.
And so now that that's happened, and I'm sure Hunter will be very excited about that. Yeah. Beth, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
Can you tell us a little bit about just why General Conference? How is this a part of your vocational life and your call to it?
So ever since I was a seminarian, I have been fascinated by United Methodist polity. Dr. Tom Frank was my polity professor at
I have a
Candler.
book by him.
Yeah, you have probably a couple. And just really instilled a love of polity in me. I did some work with him when I was at Candler, and it's just always kind of fascinated me. So I've attended a couple of general conferences for fun to observe.
For fun, wow.
Right? I know.
And have they been really fun?
Really weird. Actually,
Good.
I've enjoyed them. So I've been a reserve delegate a couple times, and now I've made it up to the delegation. Here we are.
Yeah, you're on our delegation, and so you are on the Judicial Administration Committee. So you know, this is the one when you look at like the whole list of them that just sounds the most like interesting, I think. No,
to
I'm just
you,
kidding.
I'm
Not
sure.
to me.
Yeah,
not to me at all. So it probably is actually the one that sounds the most like, wait, why would you sign up for that if you were asking me? So what was it about judicial admin that really drew you to that work and why you wanted to serve on that legislative committee?
So really specifically in 2019, when we signed up for these things, I was about 5 years out from a role on our Board of Ordained Ministry called Conference Relations Chairperson.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that role, I had to run some fair process hearings for folks, and in the midst of that, I got really interested and intrigued in how it is that we ensure a fair process in our denomination when folks are brought up on chargeable offenses and all that kind of stuff. So it was one of my areas of at least some experience in the process. So that's why I put it down as one of my choices. And here we are.
And here you are. That's great. That's actually a really compelling story and good reason to be interested in that work. And so have you found, as you've started diving into the legislation, doing all your preparation, is that matching kind of your expectation in terms of how the legislation's unfolding?
Yeah, a little bit. The stuff that I was involved with is in a different part of the discipline.
Okay, sure.
So, but the appeals process of that is in this part, and sort of the what's next of that. So yeah, it's been relevant. It's something that I knew a little about and understood a little bit about. Which, I mean, no, I don't think any clergy want to say, "Oh yeah, I'm an expert on the complaint process." Right. So I'm not here because I've ever been a part of a complaint or any of those things. It was interesting. And then in the ensuing years in Virginia, we have had some complaint processes in the annual conference that could have gone better than perhaps they did. And so that increased my interest in staying in the mix.
Well, and what you just described is something I think is really important for folks who are listening to understand, that there are different elements of process that are found in different legislative committees.
Right.
We've actually talked about this in a couple of these podcasts, that like your committee is going to take one element of process, but there's like ordained ministry, for example, might have a part
the
of
other
it.
part of that process.
And,
absolutely.
And so it's really interesting to think about then how do you make the legislation all sing together when you've got different committees. And sometimes that's part of the work too, is taking older legislation and saying, hey, this actually doesn't make sense because it was written in two different places.
Right. And we actually have a couple of petitions that say, organize this better.
Yeah, right.
We wrote this legislation and it's in the Book of Discipline, but it makes not a whit of sense the way it's laid out. So let's better it up.
Well, so maybe that's a good transition to talk about sort of the general framework of the legislation for judicial admin. So if you were to kind of take like a pulled back 10,000, 20,000 foot view of it, are there different sort of buckets where legislation's landing? And then maybe as a part of that too, let's talk a little bit about disciplinary petitions versus resolutions and what you're seeing in that.
Yeah, and we really don't have a lot of resolution kinds of stuff.
Sure.
I think the first bucket is our Judicial Council and how that functions. So, as a reminder, because everybody doesn't get nitty-gritty into polity, United Methodist Church really mirrors our nation. So there's a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. General Conference is legislative, bishops are executive, and we have a Judicial Council that is the judicial branch. And so some legislation around how that Judicial Council functions, how they report out their decisions, transparency, some things like that. Sure. Then there is a bucket of legislation around our complaint and trial process.
Okay.
And I know you've talked in some other podcasts about the 2019 General Conference and some of the things that happened there.
Sure.
As far as the complaint and trial process, there wasn't a lot of impact, but there are some justice issues in that bucket.
Okay.
And so we are going to be looking at how you keep a process moving along.
Sure.
Are there some time parameters?
I was just going to ask time
Right,
limits. Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
So we in Virginia experienced between 2019 and I guess last year one fairly public complaint process that went on way too long in the opinion of many folks. And so in that case, how do you keep that moving? How does our discipline speak to that kind of thing?
Sure.
And then sort of the third bucket is chargeable offenses.
Okay.
So clergy and laity actually can be brought up on chargeable offenses in the church.
Of course.
And one of the things that happened in 2019 is that there were specific penalties that were put in the Book of Discipline for just one part of our chargeable offenses. That is either being an LGBTQ clergy or performing a same-sex wedding.
Okay.
And some fairly harsh minimum sentences were put in 2019. So we have a lot of legislation that simply moves to strike that language and say, the trial court decides what the offense, what the penalty is for an offense, and also some language to strike those particular things from our list of chargeable offenses so that we do no harm.
That was going to be my question is, do you sense that the legislation is looking to expand the list of chargeable offenses to kind of contract it? Yeah, of course. And do you think, is that, so when we think about some of the themes that are kind of prevalent throughout the entire General Conference, in a lot of these conversations we've talked about regionalization, removal of harmful language, and the revision of the social principles. So we know revised social principles really doesn't fall into your bucket. The removal of harmful language, do you feel like some of what you're dealing with really is focused on that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, is removing those chargeable offenses, those mandatory penalties. And
it sounds like even the process piece might be a way of addressing that to some degree to make sure that people aren't held in these sort of forever long tie-ups around things like that.
Let's move things. Now, we also have some legislation from, again, pre the reality we're living in now that calls for a moratorium on trials.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So before the protocol, before
any kind of abeyance,
any kind of abeyance and all that. So we do have, like many other, I think, legislative committees have some legislation that we may just look at and say, that is no longer relevant legislation in our 2024 world, and so just sort of put it off, put it over here.
Yeah. Did you find that in the volume 3 of the ADCA, so for our listeners, that's the volume that came out in late January of this year that delegates were given a robust 3 months to prepare for. Did you have a lot of new legislation
we
come
had
in that?
2 pages, Jonathan.
2 pages. Oh, boy. Okay.
And they weren't even full pages. There was a lot of white space. So, no, so sorry.
So you win the prize.
Yep, I do. I'll take it.
That's good.
Major themes, though, we also, interestingly, have a couple that are related to regionalization.
Sure. Thank you for bringing us
back.
Not
many, but we have a couple that talk about looking at the civil laws
Okay.
of the government
Yeah.
and the context where your
Of
trial
course.
is taking place, right? Because there are places where some things are legal or illegal within our United Methodist connection
Right.
that differ depending on where
Absolutely.
you live.
Absolutely.
So I think that's kind of our small piece of the regionalization.
That's. I wonder if I'm not sure if this is where this particular conversation would fall, but I know like recently there was a thing about disaffiliations in Eastern Europe, and so like the Bulgaria annual conference, for example, just completely disaffiliated, and they could, even though there wasn't a provision in the Book of Discipline, because the trust clause didn't apply to their government.
Legal. Right, sure.
Like,
that's a great example.
Yeah.
Trust clause doesn't apply with their government,
Yeah.
so they're not bound.
So that's it.
Yeah.
Well, that seems that we can have a lot of opinions about different things. That just seems logical. In a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to sort of be in sync with the laws of your land.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about just sort of your preparation process. So you're I'm thinking a first-time delegate, not a first-time attender.
Yeah, but a first-time delegate, yeah.
So what's it been like just reading legislation? How are you going about that preparation work?
So well, first of all, I would say that I think the preparation we've done as a delegation has been excellent.
Sure.
I think that's why I just can't say enough about the ways we've had speakers come in, and we've been prepared for a lot of the stuff that was in the delegate orientation a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
We kind of already covered it, so I didn't have to pay quite as close attention. I picked up my ADCAs again last fall, along with many of us, and I wouldn't say pick them up. I put them on my iPad again.
All right, fellow tablet.
Yes, tablets for the win, and that means back strain will be less at General Conference.
Yeah, this is a little bit lighter than a backpack of 1,500 plus pages.
Yeah. So picked that up again and just started bookmarking and highlighting. I actually, pulled out my legislation and created a new document that is just judicial legislation. I've also been meeting with some folks on our legislative committee across the connection.
Yeah, great.
So having conversation, getting to know each other so that we won't be strangers when we walk into that room for the first time. And reading and highlighting, but also making sure I knew the big themes,
of course.
But also trusting the other legislative committees to do their work.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Church and society, what are you,
3?
1 or 3?
Yeah, 3,
I trust you, know, you're going to handle, and you're going to let our delegation know if there's changes or shifts that we need to pay attention to. And that I'm, really approaching it as a team and trusting your team.
Absolutely.
I think is super important.
It's a reminder. I don't know if it's been this way for you. For me, it's been such a reminder of how collaborative this has to be for it to be successful.
Yeah.
I don't. Has your in that sort of subgroup? Have you started looking at this specific legislation and talking about kind of?
We've
support
got
it
charts
or not?
of what do we support, what do we throw out, what do we
like editing maybe along the way.
Nice. I mean, or naming. Look, the folks who wrote these 6 petitions are no longer in the United Methodist Church.
That's really important.
So let's set those aside.
Absolutely.
So we've started having some of those conversations.
Absolutely.
And clearly, without making decisions.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think, being able to learn from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of just human nature. That's how you build trust, to be able to say, hey, we're going to, rather than just being strangers who walk into a room together, we have some degree of relationship and you can live into that.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, as we're kind of coming to a close, I wonder, kind of the question that we ask at the end of this podcast is often when we get to May 3rd, we're getting ready to leave Charlotte. What's the story that you hope that we're telling when we come home from General Conference?
I hope that we're telling a story of global connections and relationships that have been built. I hope that we're telling the story of a church that has been freed to do contextual ministry. I hope that we're telling the story of the church that Jesus opened to people of all ages, nations, races, all of everything. The table is bigger than we can imagine. And I hope we're telling the story of that table.
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful. Are there any other closing thoughts or remarks that you'd want to share with people before we go?
I think pray for us. Pray for we're now getting to the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks out.
Well, and when this airs, it'll be even closer.
Yeah.
It'll be closer to about a month out.
Pray that the delegation is able to enter rested. that nobody gets sick, that everybody has good, comfy walking shoes, and
Hope you have your Berks.
nobody
can see that.
Yeah, nobody can see. I got my boots on. Just pray for our well-being, physical, mental, spiritual, all of that as we enter into General Conference.
Gosh, that's so important too. I had a conversation with somebody on our delegation this week who was talking about a spouse who's going to have a medical procedure not too long before General Conference, and just kind of that overarching prayer that everything's okay there, so that the focus can be on General Conference. So that's easy. It's easy to lose sight of that idea of rest and wellness, and that being a huge part of the narrative there.
And it is really, having attended, I do know it is a very immersive 2-week experience for the delegates, right? It's not, you can't always stop and FaceTime the kids at dinner time and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and one of the pieces of news that we've gotten relatively recently is like all our meals are going to be the convention. So you're literally in one room
the convention center. And I'm still.
Which there's some really good reasons for, and it's really generous. But it is also like, we're going to be in one room for a really long time.
Right.
So wise to pull all of that up. Well, Beth, thank you so much for sharing with us about this. And hey, huge thanks to you for taking time to tune in and to learn more about this.
You.
Just as a reminder, you can find all the resources that we're preparing around General Conference at vaumc.org/GC2024. There are thematic videos. There are these legislative committee podcasts, all sorts of information's right there for you. Like Beth said, please continue to pray for our delegation as we get closer to Charlotte, and know that we are really grateful for you taking the time to tune into this, and we'll be back soon with another podcast. But until then, we hope you enjoy the day, be well, and we'll see you real soon.